Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video. And in this video we are going to be continuing on with our C# programming tutorial series. And in this particular video we are going to be talking about the difference between reference and value types, as well as what a null reference is, and we're also going to take a look at null coalescing. All these topics relate to one another, and just stay tuned. I'm going to explain all of it to you right now. So, to start off with, let's talk about the differences between a reference type and a value type. Now, a reference type, to begin with, is a type in C# that can be the value of null. Now, null is essentially the absence of a value. So anything that is a reference type can contain some kind of value, or in this case, like in the case of object-oriented programming, an object or a reference type, which is an object, will contain a memory address. So it can contain a memory address, or it can contain nothing. It can be null. And what will happen if you try to reference something from an object that doesn't have a value, that's null, C# will throw what's called a null reference exception. And the null reference exception basically tells you, hey, this thing that you tried to use doesn't have a value. So those will generally crash your app if you don't handle them. Later on in this series, we'll talk about how you can handle exceptions. But for now, just keep in mind that can happen if you try to reference something that is null. Now, a value type is something that out of the box cannot be null. .NET 6 and beyond has this setting you can toggle in your project for nullable, which can make value types nullable. But generally speaking, out of the box, it should be assumed that all value types are not nullable, so they can't be null. They will always contain some kind of value. And those value types can be something like an integer or a double, a float, stuff like that. A reference type, an example of a reference type would be a string. A string is technically an object, and so therefore that can be null. And we'll demonstrate that right now. So, if we go ahead and we say string str1, for example, we'll set it equal to null, like that. This is perfectly valid. But if we say int x equals null, and we save it, you can see we get a red underline. If we go to our error list, let's see, we want this one. You can see that the int cannot contain null because it's not a nullable type. And later on we'll talk about making value types nullable and what that means. But for now we're not going to do that. So let's get rid of that int where it's assigned to null. Because if we keep doing that, we're going to keep throwing that error. I am so sorry, guys. Okay, so here we are with our string. It's equal to null, yada, yada, yada. So if we try to use this and we say console.writeLine we can say str1.length, let's say. Okay, so you can see here that nothing is syntactically wrong. This is all syntactically correct. So what this console write line statement is doing is it's getting the length of the string and then outputting that to the console. But there's nothing wrong with this, technically speaking. However, if we run our code, we do a control F5, like that. You can see here that when it runs, I'm going to invert the colors here. And we're going to zoom in on this. As it stands right now, you can see that it will throw this null reference exception. Because again, it's not, because it's not an actual string value. There's nothing there. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to invert my colors again. Now, with that in mind, that's what happens when we have a value that's null and we try to reference it. However, we can also go ahead and use what's called the null coalescing operator. And what this operator will do is it will give us the opportunity to provide an alternative value that should be used in the case that the expression or the value we were trying to extract or use or whatever on the left side of the operator is null. Now, if that made no sense to you, that's fine. Don't worry about it. So what we'll do is we'll delete all of this, and we'll say string str1 we'll set this equal to null, like that. And then we will have a str2 equal to str1 semicolon. And so now what this will do is it will still throw a null reference exception because we're trying to... Well, actually, it won't because we're assigning, again, null. We're assigning the value of str1 to str2, which is null. If we try to, say, output the value in a console write line statement, then it will throw the null reference. But right now, if we don't want str2 to be null, we need to give it we need to provide it with an alternative value in the case that str1 is null. And we can do this by saying space question mark, so double question mark, and then provide it with a value. So in this case, we'll say default value, like that. Okay, and so now what we're doing here is we're saying assign the value of assign the value that str1 contains to str2 as long as it's not null. If str1 is null, then assign the value of default value to str2. Okay. All right, and so now let's go ahead and console.writeLine str2, like that. And so now we can do a control F5. And now you can see default value is printed to the console because str1 is null. But that's not all we can do with this. If we wanted to, we could also do what's called null coalescing chaining. So we can chain the null coalescing if we have multiple values that could be null. Right? So let's say we have a string and we call this str3. This will be null as well. String str4 is also null. String str5 is also null, but string str6 is going to be equal to the default value, like that. Well, when we do that, we can then go ahead, let's see here. We can go ahead and do string str7 is equal to whatever the value of str3 is. If that's null, assign str4. If that's null, do str5. If that is null, do str6. And if that's null, then we can do some other value, like that. And so let's go ahead and quickly take a look at this here, right? So I'm going to kind of bring this up to the top. You can see in this str7 initialization, we're saying, okay, well, assign str7 the value of str3, right? If that's null, using null coalescing, we then say, okay, then do str5. Or str4, rather. If that is null, using another null coalescing, do str5. So on and so forth. And it keeps going down the line until we reach str6. And even if that is null, we give it the value of some other value. If, let's say we say console dot write line str7. If we go ahead and do a control F5 now, you can see in our console we output default value again, because str6 is set to default value and not null. So it went through all the different values that we gave it, string 3, 4, 5, 6, and it was able to find that string 6 was not null. So it used that, not even bothering with some other value, because it already found something that wasn't null. And this is great for when you're calling a method, for example, in, say, a web application. If you're writing C# for a back end of a web application, and you know something could return null, you can use null coalescing to try to avoid that null reference exception. Or you're using a desktop application and you want to protect against any potential null values. Again, you can do null coalescing to avoid that. If the specific situation doesn't require specific exception handling, which again we'll cover later on in this series. So that pretty much does it for this video, guys, on reference types versus value types, null coalescing, and what the null reference exception is. So thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.